Welcome to Liticast, everyone. Hello. I hope you're having a great day out there. Thank you for joining us on YouTube Live, on LinkedIn Live, on our own website, our own live stream. For wherever you're coming from, welcome. Hoping everybody's safe and sound out there and weathering the storm, so to speak. Today, I'm very, very lucky to have Sam Pond on with us. Sam is the managing partner of Pond Lehocky, one of the largest workers' compensation disability firms in the country, and a longtime client of Litify, and I would venture to say a friend of mine. Sam and I have known each other a long time, and he's been fantastic to work with. And we've actually, had shared a couple libations over the years and shared some fun stories. So, Sam, first and foremost, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you joining, and I'm looking forward to getting your insight into a couple things.
Well, thanks for having me. Libations are on top of my list as far as with friends. Can't wait to get back to that. And doing a Liticast event, which has always been just such a great and fabulous experience. But thanks for having me. I'm hoping you and all your family are doing well. Thank you.
Likewise, Sam. You mentioned Liticast. It's interesting. That was we spent a couple of years really building up that following and what really were great shows, if I do say so myself. But for us, it was great to host them. But it was really interesting is to get this group of very progressive thinking folks together, very smart people who think about the legal industry and what we're doing every day in a different way. So we're trying to replicate that here on these Liticast series, bringing in a variety of topics and variety of guests, much like the Liticast events that we did live. So yeah, we're looking forward to getting those things back going.
I think the Liticast is, what was great about Liticast, and which is going to be great about this, is that we're hearing about what other people are doing in our field. And, you can get together for a CLE and talk about legal issues, but when you really had the Liticast events, you were able to develop relationships, but also share about running the practice of law in regard to technology. And quite frankly, right now, Litify is about as relevant as we could possibly have anything be relevant in this day and age in regard to working remotely. So Litify, we were lucky to get involved with Litify, and now having it allow us to be the great asset it is.
Taking the words out of my mouth, Sam, but thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. We've actually been probably busier than we were even prior to COVID, just because folks that we talked to in the past that maybe contemplated this or they're coming back to us, and many, and I do welcome this to our listeners. Many are just calling for advice. They just want to understand, either from a technology perspective, process perspective, what they should be thinking about now, and we're happy to give that advice. Not clearly. I think this is the time where just as human beings, it's on us to help each other. So, but yeah, thanks for that, Sam. I appreciate it.
This is pandemics don't happen every day. In fact, they haven't happened in a century in our country.
Right.
So we have to look at these crises as opportunities to learn. And what have we learned? We clearly have learned the how effective you have to be connected-wise remotely. You also then have to say, well, what can I get in regard to monitoring productivity in regard to staff that's operating remotely and having people held accountable? And we really, I want to tell you, Terry, we have not missed a beat with having Litify connecting all of us and then getting the dashboards, productivity, seamlessness. So it's been great. The other thing is we have to learn about, especially if you run a firm, is how do we react in a crisis? And we have to take whatever is going on in this once in a century, hopefully it's once in a century, hopefully it's once in 5 centuries event, and what are we going to do and how are we going to act as leaders? So what are we doing? And then, look, the number one rule in our firm, over being involved in this for 30 years, we have certain rules in crisis in our firm. The first thing is do no harm. We don't want to be in a situation in the crisis to do any more harm. Secondly, don't panic. Keep the fear level lower. And then make sure you use this technology as best we possibly can to be able to serve our clients as effectively as if nothing ever happened.
Right. Actually, I'd planned to ask you that question, but maybe as a segue there, how have you been messaging to your staff? What has that message been? And then also just extend that to your clients, and how you guys are known for great levels of service and personal attention. How are you with both your staff and your clients? How are you maintaining that? What is your message? Just playing off what you just said there.
Well, in regard to our clients, we do Facebook Lives. We have messaging going out in our email base. And we have been telling them that, giving them updates in regard to what's going with the court system, how are things processing, what they should be worried about. And then our weekly Facebook Lives, they can call in and give us questions about what's going on, generally speaking, with the court systems, but also with any kind of legislation. What's the government doing? How do we see this pandemic playing out? We had a doctor on to talk about different aspects, and we'll continue to do that almost like on a holistic view for general health. In regard to the staff, we have a communication every Friday, and embedded in that communication is I do a video as best as I can shoot a video to talk about what the messaging is and what the updates are in regard to how the practice is that week. We also have weekly reset meetings every Friday, restructuring meetings in regard to the executive team. And we also have an outside consultant that comes in and kind of gives us some additional advice because we want an outside view as to what's going on in the world. We've also been doing daily 1 o'clock meetings with the team and the partners. And then on the weekend, we have a weekly attorney conference. They bring in calls. We have all of these situations. We have a specific agenda that's outlined and prepared so that we can execute and talk about it and take the next steps in regard to responding. And then we've also been very involved in the political aspect of this in regards to the policymakers and what they're doing to make sure that the system is running smoothly, whether it's addressing immunity that is now spreading throughout the states like the pandemic to give a lot of people maybe too much immunity in regard to this event, in regard to what's happening to allow us to act remotely for court hearings and depositions and settlement conferences. And then what's happening throughout our national network to find out what's happening in the other jurisdictions in regard to the court systems. So there's a lot of things going on, but we want communication with our staff, our clients, and our referral network. We want to let them know that we're up and running. We're not really missing a beat. Secondly, that we're providing service. If we're not doing what we promise to do in regard to delivering service, let us know. In regard to our referral network, are you okay? Do you need anything from us, whether it's technical advice? And a lot of our referral network, we'd love to have them in Litify, and it's hard for us to have anyone in our referral network without being in Litify. We got involved. We started talking about this in mid-February. Mm-hmm. We went away for a couple of days. We started talking about a number of things, including COVID. And by early March, we had already tested remote capabilities on a scale of 50. Now, we had 260 people on a scale of 50. We tested that whole thing remotely. That's through Sean Lehocky and my operations people that are just fantastic. As you know, Sean is just an amazing leader and technical guy. For sure. So we did that, and then we have an all-hands gathering of the staff. We told the staff, and I continue to tell the staff, and I'm going to continue to tell the audience, educate yourself. We have a duty as citizens to understand exactly what this is. Is there really something that we should be afraid of? I always go back to FDR's. My father pounded into me FDR. He grew up in the Great Depression. And he said, the really thing we have to worry about is fear. We have to worry about panic. And that's the fear we should have. We have to understand this virus. This virus is a COVID virus. We have 4 COVID viruses that currently we deal with every year. And they're called seasonal flus. There are 4 different types, 2 alphas and 2 betas. I don't want to get too technical. But we have to understand what they do and who they're going to affect. And we have to see how this plays out and then understand what is the threat. How long will the threat be? How it's going to affect us and our family. How it's going to affect our staff. So I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a lot going on here. And I would suggest that people have to really educate themselves not only about this, but in regard to what they're doing in regard to a crisis.
Right. There's a few things you mentioned there that I want to drill into because I think they're very important. The first one that pops out, and just realistically, are you seeing comp claims for people that got sick at work or sick through something that they didn't do? Are you seeing that yet?
Funny, we had a settlement conference yesterday with the largest workers' comp carrier, all-day conference, remotely, obviously. in Pennsylvania, and they have a big drop in claims, or probably 60 to 75%, and about a quarter of them are COVID cases.
Wow.
That is not the same thing. We're seeing intakes. I would say that we're seeing about 15% of our intakes are COVID-19 cases. And as most of them are, under 40, under 50, people are getting tested. They have no symptoms. Over 50, their symptoms are somewhere between a cold and a flu. If they are a little older, 65, 70, like a bus driver we have, meatpacking people, and they have comorbid conditions, we've had a number of death cases. So that's the people have it. It's some similar flu-like symptoms. They're 2-week claims. We found that generally we're worried about how employers are handling this.
Right.
We represent a lot of nurses. I'm not particularly happy with how hospitals have been dealing with these frontline essential healthcare workers and dealing with them in regard to getting COVID on the job. They've been telling them to take their personal time, sick time. We're getting very aggressive, and we're doing that on a pro bono basis.
It's interesting is that made me think of and there's a lot of analogies with post 9/11, and you mentioned in passing earlier and how are these immunities going too far? And we get it. On one side, we get it. We understand that, address the issue at hand and let's not get caught up with unnecessary regulations or nuance when we have to attack, the alien that is upon us. I get that. But you could just give me a little more on that, though, because I think it's very important where we don't want just that pendulum to swing so far where it's just like, again, nurses, frontline folks are getting put at risk because we need to attack the aliens. Pardon my weird analogy, but just
no, it's this is an alien. So I think the analogy is probably appropriate. The immunities to folks that are opponents of civil justice are looking at this to take advantage of giving people immunity for negligence and in some situations recklessness. In response to COVID-19, we can't have someone that had nothing to do with dealing with an emergency situation. Let me back up and talk about the emergency situation.
Okay.
COVID-19 here in Pennsylvania, we have, and I had a conversation with the executive branch this week, we have 70% of our ventilators available. We have almost 50% of our ICU beds empty. So we're not in a mass triage place, okay? And if you look at Google global influenza overwhelming hospitals, regrettably, our hospital systems aren't built out enough, and they're overwhelmed yearly depending on where the outbreaks are throughout not only the country, but throughout the world. Milan and northern Italy in 2016 had a horrible overwhelming. Mm-hmm. My point is, in regard to the immunity, most of us are not in an emergency situation. Some hospitals in the New York City area got stretched, but most of us aren't in an emergency situation. We don't want to deter people that are retired doctors that come back and help and then get sued. We don't want that. But if they're dealing with COVID-19, then we have to give some sort of immunity to come back. But someone that's not dealing with a COVID-19 situation and then all of a sudden says, oh, COVID-19 was in my mind, so I rushed. Well, unless you were rushed, the standard of care applies. In Pennsylvania, we have Good Samaritan laws. The Good Samaritans cover this. So we want to have that balance and fairness, and we don't want to take advantage of the immunity argument to really shut out people that have legitimate meritorious cases that are injured and some killed because some others negligence. We can't have that. That's going to be making the remedy worse than the disease we have here. So we have to be mindful. We have to balance all these things, and we have to have a very professional discussion about it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and it's interesting well, I'm actually interested in your take on this because I've been thinking about what are defense lawyers thinking right now? Have they been reacting? I'm sure they're reacting in some way, but were they prepared for this? Because it sounds like you guys were taking some measures early on and doing, but I'm curious your take on that on the other side of the fence. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, they weren't. And generally, I don't know if they understood quite frankly, what was going to happen here. What we did here in Pennsylvania was we put together a coalition. I had reached out to a lot of the managing partners of the defense firms that I knew, and coincidentally had just had dinner with one the week before. Reached out to them and worked with the government and the administration to be able to have the system run remotely. And we spent a number of days putting that group together. And our Department of Labor and Industry reacted really effectively. And quite frankly, Terry, we have our clients and all the stakeholders in the Pennsylvania workers' compensation system really haven't missed a beat. Shifting over to National Social Security, a little problematic to start. People have been waiting for 2 years to get their day in court. Some of these people die along the way. We got involved with that. We went to some U.S. senators, talked to those chief of staffs, very much on it. New system was put in place technologically. We worked with them on that to conduct remote hearings. It's been very effective. However, it's the Court of Common Pleas in the state systems and the city systems that we've been disappointed with a lot throughout the country. Up in Massachusetts, our good friend, the Ketch's firm, and they've had the real big hurdles to get over in regard to opening their systems. The defense bar hasn't worked really well, in my opinion, with the Court of Common Pleas and the personal injury folks and the civil justice stuff. The civil practices and the criminal practices, especially the civil practices, we are disappointed in regard to the defense firms' responses to this. We don't know their intention. We don't know if they're intentionally delaying things. But the fact that they didn't seem to be very cooperative in dealing with the trial bar to get things moving forward, we think is a bit of a failing on their part. We thought we could have saw a little bit better cooperation.
Yeah, I would say, and we're in a unique position at Litify because we're talking to all types of firms, all types of legal professionals, frankly. And I get this sense a little bit, and maybe it's not justified, but I get the sense a little bit that some of the defense folks are thinking this is going to pass and things are going to go back to normal, whatever normal might have been. But and maybe that's just indicative of maybe a sort of a more old school type of thought process as it relates to the law and technology, frankly. But there is a new normal. There frankly is a new normal, and I can say with certainty that many of the things we're doing right now in terms of video conference and collaboration over technology, they're not going to go away just because of the sheer convenience of it. And I'm already seeing some of the regulatory items that have been debated for a long time, just by pure necessity. They're going to be loosened up, and people are going to recognize there's a better way to do things. John Hawkins, another early client, I think you might have met throughout the years in South Carolina. John, great guy. He had this comment on a Liticast a few weeks ago. He was saying, think about the concept of a notary public, the idea of having to be in person with somebody to get a wet signature on something as a witness. You just think about the 150-year-old concept that is, and frankly, how ripe that is for corruption. And so you're actually way better off doing an e-signature type of format where it's, you can time and date stamp things, and it goes back to the individual device. And so I'm leading to a question here. Do you see what longer lasting, impactful things do you see specifically with government and maybe with some of your more traditional firms and the way they operate? Like how do you see that shift happening? And will there be sort of I'm sure there'll be some desire to kind of go back to normal, but how do you see, is there that backslide going to happen, and to what extent? Just want to get your thoughts around that.
I think we'll backslide. We're not going to be in this situation, but I clearly think we're in a new normal. I think people have, what you said is right on point. The convenience, the efficiency, the productivity of doing things remotely is, what argument do you have against it?
Right.
When you talk about the notary, we need to have all of our settlements in our practice area notarized. And the governor signed an executive order changing that we could do it electronically. In Social Security disability, one of the things we faced for a decade is to have an e-sign. And the whole argument against the e-sign was privacy. And we now understand that argument although has some volition, has now been put to the test. And it has allowed our clients who are disabled not have to drive, in some situations, 100 miles to a hearing. Mm-hmm. The judge can assess their credibility just like I can assess your face and your body language remotely. It doesn't make any sense to go back and do the things the way that they were doing in the past. You started this question off with something that has always resonated with us, and probably with when I say us, I'm talking about in our firm and the Litify community and the people that understand things will change, is that folks of my age just aren't grabbing the need for the technology to bring into their practices to make us efficient and productive and automated. This is the event that if you don't see this event as understanding that this is the way things will start to be done because it's better. Mm-hmm. It's better. That doesn't mean we're not going to have human contact. You have to have a jury trial. You have to have a jury trial. Sure. You have to put jurors in the box and have to see everybody. But some of that may happen. But clearly the e-signs, the notaries, we've dealt with all of these issues, remote hearings. These are things that there's you have to be a hell of a trial lawyer to argue against them.
Right. I read an article on ALM, and it described it as a forced reckoning for firms and for legal professionals in general. And it's a
great way to put it.
Yeah, great. It's the best description I've heard. It really is a forced reckoning. On that note, we've been hearing a little bit about firms thinking about expansion at this point, meaning going into Europe, going into or any really new geography, expanding a practice area, maybe evolving from auto accidents for a PI firm, for example, into different areas. How much validity is there to that? I mean, people are always thinking along those lines, but do you think this really kind of moves people in that direction? Or again, do they kind of slip back to their old habits or maybe old markets as a result of this at some point?
I think you're going to see both. You'll see some folks who will just slip back into their, the comfort of their old shoe. But there are people talking about exactly what you're talking about, and that is to be more diversified, more expansive. We have seen new areas of law pop up. We've seen a whole new business in this business interruption field come into play. People have been very concerned about motor vehicle accidents, especially with no one being on the roads. There's a whole litany of things that we're seeing that are evolving because of this, and also being able to not necessarily have to, if you can do things more remotely, it's a game changer. It's a game changer way you operate your business. And it talks about having offices, physical space, the cost of commercial buildings. Just getting into the commercial the building business. That's a whole other conversation we could have. We could do a whole hour on that. So there's different areas of law that are going to pop up and different expansions that you're going to see because of this.
Necessity. Yeah, because of necessity. We had another Litify client, Jonathan Negretti, on a week ago, and he was like, he's been remote since day one, since 2012. He's never had an office. He'll meet his clients in particular places and such. But, it was funny. He described, he goes, yeah, I was pretty much broke when I started. So it wasn't because, I wasn't some great wizard that saw this coming. He goes, but now I look like a genius because we've never had to really be in a specific brick and mortar.
Right. Kind of and he's a genius. I wish I was him.
Right.
I wish I was him. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I love seeing my staff and getting together and having that camaraderie. But for a solo person, yeah, I mean, it's you see your clients when you have to see them, and you go to court when you have to go to. But yeah,
exactly right. On that same business angle, I don't know if you saw this, but I guess it's still in the comment period. But in Utah, the idea that you don't necessarily need to be a lawyer to have majority ownership within a firm. And in fact, this morning I was on a conversation with a potential client out there, and he was really rethinking how you could really be a one-stop shop, so to speak, with name the professional service, accounting needs, financial guidance, law. I need a will, and I need some guidance on what investments to make. Like, do that in one place. You've always been a very forward-thinking business person / lawyer. Your head must be spinning a little bit on the potential opportunities there. Have you given any thought to that? Is it something that just kind of raises the curtain on a few things for you?
We've been watching this closely for a number of years, and clearly we came up on our daily conference call today about non-lawyers investing in law firms. This has been obviously, as you know, in the UK and the Commonwealth countries, that you can have ownership by non-lawyers into a law firm. America is kind of the last bastion for a lot of legitimate reasons in regard to having lawyers only be owners of law firms. But it's clearly come in full effect, as you know, in medicine. So it's another profession that's really been, I don't want to say hijacked, but clearly has big money coming into the medical field to run it for profit. So not that doctors weren't running it for profit. It's clear they wanted to make a good living. This has been going on for some time, and we're seeing a real lot of energy. Utah has been really at the kind of forefront of this. It's a conservative state, but in regard to ownership of law firms, it's really there. They've got their bar looking at it. There's a number of other states looking at it, and there's one place in America that you can do that, and that's in D.C. So in D.C., you can do that now. So you can have a law firm in D.C. with outside ownership. The problem, I don't know if it's a problem, but there's a lot of restrictions to that. You can't have private equity. You can't have a corporation. You have to have an individual. The individual has to come in and be participant in the functioning of the firm at some sort of level. In other words, you brought in a CFO and you gave the CFO an interest because they're integral to running that practice. There's also restrictions on regard to, where can that firm practice. So it's here, it's coming. And I think your audience really ought to know that this is on its way. I don't think it's to me, and my private lawyer is, at a big firm and a great guy and just a wonderful attorney, great firm. And it's very instrumental in the ABA rules of professional responsibility. We have seen this for a while. Jacoby and Myers, I think, challenged it as unconstitutional. They lost that challenge. But it's coming. If it's coming, Terry, in 5 years or 10 years, it's coming. Right.
Better be ready for it, kind of thing. You mentioned earlier in passing something that I wanted to talk about for a minute. And in fact, when we first met, and you came to Brooklyn with your staff, and the way you were constructed, and this is like 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. You had a chief strategy officer in Sean. You had a CMO. You had Jackie. You had these amazing people that were based. You were set up like a business, and we were, our early taglines at Litify were, are you running your firm like a modern business? And we were talking about bringing Salesforce. We still talk about it, but we were very deliberately talking about bringing Salesforce into the technology into the legal space. And when we met, there was just like this kumbaya symbiotic thing that happened where you were already thinking about how can I look at my firm and sort of do a division of labor in that context. Like I have people that are very good at operations, people that are very good at strategy, people that are very good at finance. And just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's we don't see that all the time. We're seeing it more now. We are seeing it more now where firms of every ilk will see where we walk in and we're talking with a COO, or we're talking with a strategy, or you have the traditional titles like chief knowledge officer and such, but we're seeing more sort of business approach or business sort of C-suite type of construct at these firms. But you guys were a little bit ahead of the curve on that in my mind. But just talk a bit about that. How did you come to those conclusions? Obviously, it's working out great for you in the firm, but I'm just curious, like what kind of brought that about and how you're set up.
Well, if you're not set up like that and you're of a medium size, or even I would say if you even have 20 people total or more, even 15 people, you ought to be thinking about that kind of structure. It's a business, and when I talk at Liticast events, I ask the audience to raise their hand and say, how many of you see a balance sheet once a month? Maybe someone doesn't know what a balance sheet is.
Right.
How many see it once a year? because a balance sheet basically tells you what your practice is worth. I mean, that's your worth on a balance sheet. And is your balance sheet healthy? And, now that we're seeing this crisis, when you're looking at companies, you're looking at the companies that have good, solid balance sheets are the ones that are going to be able to survive because they have controlled debt, they have good cash positions, and they're able to manage that business from a business perspective in regard to cash flow, et cetera. So we started out with 22, and just 10 years ago, I came from a firm that I broke off with at 100, and we went up to 260. We did a lot of things wrong, and we have to learn. But clearly, that management team, that leadership team that we had involved, that has the independence to be creative, to think, to come with solutions, to problem solve, to understand the business, all the nuances of the business. Chief Marketing Officer. Sean's the Chief Strategy Officer, which is kind of my right-hand person, kind of a /CEO. Tommy Giordano is now kind of coming up as the attorney that is my assistant managing partner. Chief Financial Officer with a big team, Brian Riley, who you know.
Yep.
Jackie Donovan, who is a great operation. As you know, she's executor. She executes
Sure.
I can go on, but people have to have these things in place and run your practice like a business. This is a business. You're looking to make a profit, and how you do it and project and understand what you need to run it, and then go out and see what's the best way to do it. We're seeing a lot of opportunities, as a lot of people are right now, in regard to if we're strong on our balance sheet and our cash position. What are the opportunities that are now presented to us? Supply and demand. Demand structure has been crushed. We had the other report today. We have almost 30 million Americans that have lost their jobs. We're talking about Great Depression numbers. So even though we've had such a stimulus package coming in, and it'll eventually probably be $10 trillion. By the way, how many people know about the Fed? Do you know what monetary policy is and fiscal policy? So the fiscal policy is Congress approving the stimulus checks, unemployment, those type of things. Monetary policy is governing quantitative easing, interest rates. And now the Fed has put in a Main Street lending window that's going to be coming about. All your listeners that run practices ought to know about the Main Street lending facility. What's that do for you to get cheaper capital? Do you need a cheaper capital? And by the way, if there's demand destruction and everything, what can you now do for your practice to go back to a vendor and say, what is a better deal I can get because I have cash?
Right. Yeah, one of my, at the risk of sounding like Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live, when he's interviewing the Beatles and he's like, yeah, that song, that was awesome. But at one of the Liticast, when you came on stage and you had that humongous pile of file and paper sticking out of it, and you dropped it on the stage, you were like, I had to go through this crap, every week or every month just to understand where my business is at. And it's just not a way to run the business. So that this will be my little Litify commercial here. Sam made the point that you don't need to do that. You need to be thinking about this in a much broader way. You need to have this stuff digital. You need to have it at your fingertips. You need to have it on your phone where you can actually see the health of your firm, where your inventory is, what your cash position might be. And I love when you ask that question at Liticast events, because you get a lot of head scratching out in the audience, and they're like, I don't know what my worth is. And I had an interview. I got actually interviewed by someone from Bloomberg Law. And she actually had a fascinating response. We were just kind of going back and forth. I mentioned that we're seeing more and more business approach in law firms. And she said, yeah, she goes, that surprised me. I said, why? She goes, well, typically you have really smart people that, they're very good at English and history and political science, but they suck at math. And he goes, and then when it comes to college, they're like, okay, how can I take my strengths and forget my weaknesses or the things I'm just not interested in? I'll become a lawyer. So he's like, they basically push it out as long as they can to not understand numbers and predictive intelligence and things like they don't want to know. And she goes, but she agreed with me in the sense that that's changing, and it has to change because it is a business. You need to run it as such. You need to, and frankly, the whole concept of knowledge is power. Data is power. Why would you make silly decisions if you don't necessarily know? Like like our CEO Ruben always asks. Just ask questions that they don't know the answers to. What is your average case cost? What is your What is the time period between, lead ingestion and either settlement or jury trial? Like, people don't know. They just don't know the answers to this stuff. So it's like just that getting that information in one place is so powerful for people.
And I think, though, that you made a good point about Ruben, who's, fantastic. But what Ruben does as a lawyer, and what all lawyers do, is they need to, you can do the Socratic method. You really need to ask questions. And that's really where it comes down. Our 1 o'clock, or we had an 11 o'clock today because of the Liticast. My whole thing is asking questions. I want to know, because issues pop in my mind. I happen to have the kind of the advantage of going to business school. My undergraduate degree, I wasn't thinking about being a lawyer, but my undergraduate degree was in finance and economics. So I had kind of an idea of some, and by the way, I'm no genius when it comes to math, but certain basic things I have to do. And my team around us, they all got their MBAs. I don't have an MBA. They have an MBA. The other important thing about this, Terry, is you have to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And you talk about a Sean Lehocky. So, I'm not Sean Lehocky. I'm not Brian Riley. I'm not Jackie Donovan. These are folks that are going to come up with ideas and challenge me, because I don't have some of the brain power that they have. And by the way, they're all at least 20 years younger than me.
Right.
Sean's probably 30 years younger than me. And that's the key of the technology and bringing that into bear in regard to efficiencies, productivity, dashboards, data. We can't project. We have so many models, and unless we have data now some of the data is based on assumptions, but unless we have the data that's good, then we can't make decisions. We have to have data that has a very small delta, because we need good data to make decisions on projecting. So right now we're saying, okay, what are our new intake? What's the new norm with our intakes? Because business is down, cases are down. What's the new norm? What can we project, not only from a financial standpoint, but in regard to operations? If we're going to have this many cases, what do we need in regard to staff? And let's get ahead of that curve and communicate to our staff that we may have to lay you off, we may have to furlough you, whatever. How are we going to deal with their medical coverage? All of these things you've got to start thinking about.
Yep. Yeah.
You can't think of any of that without the data.
If you don't know even the questions to ask. That's
what did I say at the start of the show? Do no harm. And in a crisis, the worst thing you can do is make it worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Educated decisions. So Sam, just in closing, I just wanted to ask you, it's a little bit more of a personal question, but I know you're a boxer. I know you grew up training or still training. What are some of those lessons that you learned in that world that you applied to the business and law world? I mean, it's a kind of a softball question. I openly admit it, but you and I have talked about this again over some beers at certain times, and I find it fascinating when you draw parallels between those two worlds. Even I know your son is following in your footsteps in that regard. But what are those parallels that you draw between those two worlds?
Well, I think in this particular time, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. In this time, we know if you're in the ring, you can't panic. And if you're in the ring, you can't leave the ring. You have to stay in the ring.
Right.
You got to be there for the whole round. So you can't stop after a minute. Now, some guy did say no mas, but very rare. You have to have a number of things. You have to persevere. You have to have resilience. You have to stay in the ring. My real concern, Terry, as I said earlier, is fear. Don't panic. Let's deal with our breathing as I would in the ring, through my nose, focus, shifting. I planned this guy was going to box me this way, and all of a sudden he's hitting me with left hooks. I need to shift, and I need to come into the next round as it is. And then the other thing in boxing is, what did I learn from this? What did I learn from this fight? So discipline, no fear, don't panic, hang in there, stay in the ring, get in the ring. As Teddy Roosevelt said, get in the ring, live life, enjoy it. Don't hide under the bed. Live. This is going to be fine. We're going to get through it. Be optimistic and believe that you're going to win the fight.
Yeah. It was Teddy Roosevelt, better to have tried and failed than never try at all. I mean, I a lot of those words are so prescient now where you're, what choice do we have? We're in the ring. We're all in the ring, right?
Absolutely.
We're here.
Yeah.
Sam, I cannot thank you enough for this session. This has really, really been tremendous for us. And I can't thank you enough for your longstanding belief in Litify and your partnership and your friendship and your whole staff. Just really amazing people. It's so great to be able to kind of stand on a platform and just proudly say, Pon Lehocky. You guys were literally our first client. You are our number one client. So I can't thank you enough for that. And thank you so much for coming on the show. Any parting words for our audience?
No fear. We're going to be fine. One day at a time. Enjoy life. Enjoy life.
Excellent. So thank you, Sam. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow us on YouTube. There'll be more Liticast. We have Keith Mitnick coming up tomorrow. Keith's going to talk about some trial strategies. And then we have more good stuff coming next week. Keep an eye open for Liticast. Thanks again, Sam. Be well. Best to everyone. Cheers, all.